What's up, everyone? It's AG Reviews back at it again. Just got back from seeing Snow White, so let's talk about it. Now, originally, when I was going to go see this film and review it, I really wanted to stay away from all of the controversy that was, associated with this film. Just because I don't think it's particularly healthy to keep talking about and keep bringing up. But after seeing the film, and looking back on what did happen and a lot of the controversy that did take place with this film, it's very evident that that had a hand in the final product and the film that we got here. So in this review, I'm going to talk about what I liked about the film, get into the controversy stuff, and what I think was changed in that, and then I'll, get into my negatives and everything with the film. But there was just no way to avoid it, really, especially after seeing the movie. I'm like, there is very clearly changes that were made to the film that was directly correlated with some of the things that were going on in the film. So there was just really no way, not to talk about it. So I'm definitely going to get into that today. To start off with my positives, the first thing I want to talk about to me is Rachel Zegler's performance as Snow White. I felt like she did a really good job. Outside of everything that people might think of her as a person, there is no dispute and no doubt in my mind that she is a very talented actress. She knows how to act. She does a good job in this film. She does a good job leading this film, and there's a certain warmth and sincerity to her that I felt like she brought to the role, and I felt like made this character, because there is some changes to the original, made this character more likable that maybe another person might not have been able to pull off. So that was definitely surprising to me because I with the comments and stuff, I didn't expect her to be one of the standout things of this film. But I felt like she did a very good job. So I definitely commend her performance in the film. And then to kind of piggyback off that, I really felt like the musical performances in this film were done very well. And some of the songs that they added into the film, in particular from Rachel Zegler as well. I'm not somebody who, loves musicals by any stretch of the imagination. But when, you actually get some musical sequences into the film that I felt like were effective and did a good job at continuing the narrative, in that way, I feel like that it's very strong and you do a very good job doing that. And this movie did. Like I said, I felt like Rachel Zegler was very good in the musical scenes. I feel like she has a good voice and fit well into that role, particularly in those scenes. But I think everybody else too. I don't really think there was anyone who was really bad when it comes to the musical scenes, except for one, which we're going to get into that in the negatives. But yeah, overall, the musical side of it, I didn't have an issue with whatsoever. And again, that's a side of filmmaking in general that's really usually not for me. So yeah, take that as what you will. And then for me, the production design and the costumes in the film are done really well. I know that this had a very high reported budget. I think it was $250 million. I mean, I could be wrong, so you can fact check me on that. So it was a very high budget film, and I felt like you saw that being spent well when it comes to the production design, when it comes to the costumes. I know some of it, in the film is CGI, but I don't feel like all of it was. It definitely felt like they had, sets built from the ground up, and you can definitely tell the quality of those are good, and it makes the world feel a bit more lived in. So I thought, from a visual and a production design and set piece standpoint, this film really delivered, and it looked very, very good. And then as my last positive, and this is kind of gonna, piggyback off into the mixed area where I talk about some of the controversies. It was publicly released, essentially, that there was significant reshoots done. This movie was supposed to come out last year, but they had to delay it a year so that way they could rehaul the story and do the reshoots and rework the narrative. And with even knowing that going in, I was expecting certain aspects of this film where you're going to feel that, where if they were changing the story significantly, that you're going to feel that there was reshoots done. And for the most part, I don't think it was all the way through, but for the most part, I actually think it felt more cohesive than what I was expecting. I felt like it was going to be two different films, and there was going to be clashes of story and style in them, you know, based off of the reasons of why they went to go reshoot the film. And I don't think, you know, like I said, not entirely, but for the most part, you don't get that vibe. I felt like it felt a lot more seamless and a lot more cohesive than what I was expecting. So, with everything, you know, that I talked about with the positives and what I did like about that film, I now want to segue into the conversation about all the controversy that surrounded this film, you know, before it was fully done and fully released. Um, Me personally, I kind of had the expectation that this movie was going to be a bit of a train wreck. And the reason for that was partly in due to some of Rachel Zegler's comments about this film. And, you know, because she had mentioned about how, you know, this film was 80 years old, which is true. And it was really outdated. And, you know, then she made some comments about the love interest and the prince and how there's a possibility that he might not even actually end up making it into the film. So that from the beginning, like a lot of people, that did worry me and made me think that, you know, if you're taking away so many things that are integral to that original film, then what are we even doing? Why are we even wasting time in remaking Snow White if you want to just change so much about it? And this is coming from someone, you know, who I'm not really even a big fan of the original Snow White. I've seen it maybe once or twice in my entire life. That's just not for me. And the movie's not made for me, right? I'm not the demographic that they were aiming for. And even with this film, I'm not the demographic they were aiming for. But a lot of those comments obviously were off-putting to a lot of people. Then you had the controversy where it was announced that there weren't going to be any dwarves in the film, and instead they were going to have the bandits, you know, to battle against the stereotype when it comes to dwarves, which that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So, like I said, it's very hard to talk about this movie knowing that information and then going and seeing the movie, because you can tell that especially with those comments that were made by Rachel Zegler and the things that we knew about the dwarves, that clearly the prince aspect of the storyline was added in. And this isn't a spoiler, you know, these are all plot lines and things that were in the original Snow White. And, you know, the prince storyline, I will say, ends up playing out similarly to how the original did in this film. And obviously, from the trailers and the marketings, we ended up getting the dwarves in the way they were. And for me, it's quite clear that the original version of this film and what we were originally supposed to get before those comments came out and before they decided to rework the narrative and do the reshoots is that there was a lot of things like this film wasn't going to represent a remake essentially of that film. A lot of the core things that are associated with Snow White were going to be absent because of the changes that they were making to this film. So I walked into the film thinking, like, if that still stands, then this is going to be a disaster. But a lot of that wasn't in there, and they did bring a lot of that stuff back, particularly with the prince and with the dwarves. So you did get the feeling of the classic Snow White. So I think a lot of people who are going to go into this movie thinking it's going to be a disaster because of that, you're going to actually be a little bit surprised at what they kept in and what they actually did. So for me, you know, it's very evident when you watch the film that the controversy and all the comments that were made by Rachel Zegler actually did have a pretty significant impact in the story and the type of film that they were going to make. And I actually think that it probably would have been for the better, because it felt like a lot of the stuff that they re-added in was stuff that was, you know, true to the original and kept the spirit of Snow White in the film. So for me, that's more of a mixed thing, really, than a positive or negative, because again, this film, the original film in general, wasn't really for me, and this film is not... I'm not the demographic for this film. You know, they're not making this film for me. They're making it for children, particularly girls, and, you know, people who were fans of the original. But with all that being said, you know, like I said, I was more surprised that this wasn't the train wreck that I think I and a lot of people thought it was going to be. There's still things about it though that I didn't like, and I don't think it was really all that great. And there was pretty much a mixed bag of what worked and what didn't. And the first thing I got to talk about is really just my issue with all of these Disney live action remakes, bar a couple of them, is that, they are remaking these older films and they're taking them and they're making them for anywhere from 100 to $300 million. And what that does is it takes a story from times past that wasn't really meant to be that, right? Wasn't meant to be a big blockbuster. It wasn't meant to be made for all these millions of dollars. And it kind of converts it into a modern blockbuster. And then when you do that, you do essentially take away what worked about the original film. So for me, even though the reshoots went back in and did add some of the classic Snow White things back into the film, which I appreciated, a lot of what doesn't work about this film has to do with the fact that they needed to justify it having a $250 million budget. So they add in things from other movies to make it feel like a blockbuster. And that's just inherently a problem. And it's inherently why I am not a fan of these Disney live action remakes. There's only been two that I've liked out of all of them, and that's Aladdin and Jungle Book. And those, to me, Aladdin not so much, but at least there was a justification once you saw the movie as to why we were remaking these films with these large budgets. Snow White is just another one where it just doesn't make sense. They added in the storyline, essentially, and it's from the trailers, that she's the rightful queen and princess, and she has to reclaim that throne from the evil queen. Well, you didn't really have that in the original Snow White, and now you're adding that in, so then it doesn't feel like Snow White. And then you have to have all the stuff with the bandits where, there's some swords and crossbows and action involved in it to justify having such a large budget and having this blockbuster version of Snow White. So for me, it's not just Snow White that's done this. It's all of these Disney live action remakes where they're inflating budgets and they're giving us movies that we didn't need to remake, and they're turning them into something that wasn't the original and what made it special in the first place. So it's just so frustrating to me that they keep doing this over and over again. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about that I really did not like about this film was Gal Gadot's performance as the evil queen. She's just way over the top and is just absolutely not good when it comes to acting in this film. Her character feels like it's part of a completely different film. Way over the top, way too cheesy, way too much going on. And, like I said, I think Rachel Zegler, acting-wise, did a great job. So when you put them together on screen, you just see the apparent differences when it comes to acting ability between the two. And, I know she's a big source of controversy when it comes to this film. So, I don't want to harp on it too long and beat her down. But, this is one of the worst performances in her career. And I don't think it's a career really that's got a lot of worthy performances in it anyways. She was just, acting wise, she was by far the worst person in this film. And then, like I said, it was very clear that the dwarves were added in as reshoots. And I think because of that, it is very obviously bad CGI when it comes to the dwarves. And, I've kind of heard that some people say that it looks like they're from Polar Express, which is accurate. I think that's what they look like. But when you have it in a live action film, when you're with actual human beings, it really gives you like that uncanny valley feel. And that was really the part when it comes to the visual department that really just didn't work for me. But again, I think that's obviously because they were not originally intended to be in the film and were added in in post-production and then the reshoots. So, can I fault them for it looking like that? Not 100%. But, you did get a year year delay in order to make this happen and to make these changes happen in the film. So I would have expected it to at least them to make an attempt to make it look a little bit more real, because you really get that like uncanny valley vibe from it, and it's just noticeable every time they're on screen. Even though I felt like character-wise, I felt like they actually did a good job with the dwarfs. I didn't even mention that in the positives. I forgot to mention that. I do feel like, you know, when it comes to humor and like heart, they did a good job. It's just they looked terrible. It just didn't look good. And when you got a $250 million budget, I rightfully assume that it should look better than that. So, but overall, guys, I mean, again, was this a disaster and the one I expected it to be? No. Did I enjoy it though? Somewhat, but not really. It's a mixed bag. I'd probably lean positive, but not by much. I still think that the film had issues, and like I said, it primarily had the issue that I have with all these Disney live action remakes. And I still feel like, regardless, I would have had that issue even outside of all the controversy. Just because, like I said, it's something that is inherent in all these live action remakes. The controversy obviously didn't help, but in some senses it kind of did, because it, you know, I was a little surprised at where it ended up landing. So yeah, you know, mixed bag for me. Some probably more mixed positive than mixed negative. On a rating scale, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I think that's about where it lands. It's right in the middle, a little bit more. I would say I enjoyed it, didn't hate it, but barely. Right, it's just right there. So yeah, guys, let's, you know, comment below. Let me know if you saw Snow White, what you thought about it. Let's keep it civil. The release of this film has just been a toxic whirlwind, and I kind of want to avoid any of that. So yeah, comment below, subscribe, you know, and everyone have a great day.